She found a lone billionaire rancher with an arrow in his back. Dash dawn came with war paint at her door. Mara Calder had lived on the edge of the high plains all her life. Her small cabin, surrounded by wide stretches of golden grass and distant hills, was a refuge from the chaos of the world. She loved the quiet, the way the wind whispered through the tall prairie grass, and the way the sky changed colors as the sun dipped below the horizon. Life here was simple, predictable, and for the most part safe. But that evening, as the sky burned orange and pink with the last light of day, something completely unexpected shattered the calm of her world. It started as a sound she had never heard before, a faint rustling from beyond the fence at the far edge of her property. Mara was used to the sounds of animals at dusk, coyotes calling in the distance, the occasional hoot of an owl, or the soft thump of a deer moving through the grass. But this rustling was different. It was heavier, more deliberate. Her heart skipped a beat as she grabbed the old lantern hanging by her cabin door, its glass slightly fogged from years of use. She stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against her face, and followed the sound toward the fence. As she approached, she saw a figure lying near the boundary of her land. At first, she thought it was an animal, perhaps a deer or a stray dog, but as she got closer, her heart pounded harder. The man, because it was a man, was slumped over, barely moving. An arrow protruded from his back at an unnatural angle, and the sight made her gasp. She instinctively stepped back, but the man groaned softly, his hand trembling as he tried to reach for something. Mara's instincts kicked in. She couldn't leave him there. The night would be merciless, and he could not survive alone with that injury. Without thinking twice, she ran back to the cabin to fetch a first aid kit. She had some basic medical supplies: bandages, antiseptic, and painkillers, enough to stabilize someone for a few hours. But she knew this was far more serious than a simple injury. Her mind raced as she imagined the possibilities. Who was he? Why was he here? And why had someone shot him with an arrow instead of calling for help? The questions seemed endless, but the one thing that mattered now was getting him somewhere safe. She returned to the spot where she had seen him, her lantern casting long shadows across the ground. The man's breathing was shallow, and his face was pale under the fading light. Mara approached cautiously, speaking softly. "Hey, you're going to be okay. Just hold on, all right?" Her voice was calm, but inside panic bubbled up. She carefully assessed the situation. The arrow was deep, and removing it could make things worse. She needed to get him somewhere warm and out of sight. Using all her strength, she managed to lift him onto a sturdy blanket she had brought. Every movement caused him to wince, and she whispered words of encouragement, hoping he could hear her. Step by step, she dragged him toward her cabin. It wasn't easy. The plains were uneven, and the golden grass snagged at her boots, but she didn't stop. She had to get him inside before the darkness fully took over. The sun had nearly vanished, and the sky was now a deep shade of purple, dotted with the first stars of the night. Once inside, Mara laid him carefully on the couch and began examining the arrow. Pierced the muscles along his back, but luckily it hadn't hit his spine or lungs. Still, he was losing blood fast, and time was critical. She cleaned the wound as best as she could, applied antiseptic, and wrapped a makeshift bandage around it. The man groaned again, opening his eyes slightly. They were a deep, striking shade of green, and they held a look of shock and confusion. Who are you?" Mara asked, gently, trying not to scare him. The man's lips moved, but the words were slurred and barely audible. He seemed too weak to form full sentences. She poured a small cup of water and held it to his lips. He drank slowly, coughing a little, but he was getting stronger by the minute. Mara's mind raced again. Someone had tried to kill him. But who? And why here, on her quiet piece of land, far from any town or city? Hours passed as Mara stayed by his side, monitoring his breathing and keeping him comfortable. The night outside was quiet now, the wind whispering through the grass like a lullaby. The moon had risen high, casting silver light into the cabin. She tried to make small talk, asking simple questions, but he was still too weak to answer clearly. All she knew was that he was not an ordinary man. There was something about him, the way he carried himself even in pain, the careful way he spoke when he managed to whisper a word, and the faint but expensive smell of his clothes that told her he was used to a life far different from her own. As she worked, Mara couldn't help but notice his hands. They were strong and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard but not with regular labor. Maybe a rancher or someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. And yet there was something refined about him, a subtle elegance in his movements that didn't quite match the rugged appearance. Mara's curiosity grew, but she pushed it aside. Right now, it was about keeping him alive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he drifted into a restless sleep. Mara stayed awake, watching him, making sure he was breathing steadily, pulled up the couch cushions for extra comfort, and sat down nearby, her lantern casting a warm glow over the room. Her mind wandered. Who had done this to him? Was it someone he knew? Or was it a random act of violence? The plains were usually quiet, safe, but tonight had proven that even the most peaceful places could hold danger. Hours later, the first hint of dawn began to creep through the windows. The sky shifted from deep purple to soft shades of pink and orange. Mara felt exhausted but couldn't leave him alone. Something about this man, his vulnerability, and the mystery surrounding him, pulled at her. She realized she had become part of a story she didn't yet understand, a story that was just beginning. And as she watched the sunlight illuminate his face, she made a silent promise she would protect him, no matter what it took. Da. Outside, the plains were waking up. Birds began to stir, and a gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of morning dew. Mara knew that when he woke he would have questions, and she might finally learn the truth about who he was, and why he had ended up on her land, wounded and alone. But for now, she simply watched over him, feeling the weight of responsibility and the pull of an adventure that had appeared in her life without warning. Desperately, it was the beginning of something she could never have imagined. The next morning, Mara awoke to the soft light of sunrise streaming through her cabin windows. The events of the previous evening still felt surreal, desk. She had never imagined that a man, wounded and mysterious, would appear at her doorstep. Yet, as she glanced at him, lying quietly on the couch, she realized that his presence had already changed her life. She could see the faint rise and fall of his chest and the way the blanket clung to his shoulders. He looked almost peaceful in sleep, but she knew the moment he woke, questions would come, and so would answers she wasn't ready to hear. She prepared a small breakfast, keeping it simple: toast, eggs, and coffee, careful not to make too much noise. Lucas Hale, as she had learned from the fragments of his muttered words, was still asleep. His breathing was steady, though he occasionally shifted, grimacing at the pain in his back. Mara wondered who he was and why someone had tried to harm him. Something about him screamed, not ordinary. Mara had grown up in a quiet town, far from the chaos of cities and big business, and she was not used to dealing with secrets, danger, or powerful strangers. When Lucas finally stirred, his eyes opened slowly. The green of his eyes seemed to reflect the colors of the plains outside, calm, deep, and slightly wild. He looked around, taking in the cabin, the breakfast, and Mara herself. His gaze was steady, but a flicker of fear passed over his face. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice weak but clear. "You're safe," Mara said softly, setting a plate of eggs on the small wooden table. You were hurt badly. I found you near my fence last night. She tried to keep her voice calm, but inside her curiosity was burning. But who was he? Why had someone shot him with an arrow? Lucas's expression tightened. He looked at her as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Mara nodded. It was strange to hear gratitude from someone who seemed so strong yet so vulnerable at the same time. She gestured toward the breakfast. "Eat something. You'll need energy to stand later." He tried to sit, wincing in pain, and Mara quickly helped him. As he ate slowly, Mara asked more questions, keeping her tone gentle. "Do you know who shot you? Was it someone you knew?" Lucas shook his head, closing his eyes for a moment. "I don't know. It all happened so fast. I was ambushed, but it wasn't random. Whoever did this knew exactly where I would be." Mara felt a chill. Someone had targeted him, but why? She realized that this man was no ordinary traveler. He spoke carefully, as if every word could reveal something dangerous. She noticed the way he looked at the cabin, the furniture, and the tools scattered around. Psst. It was like he was studying her life without judgment, but with curiosity. After a pause, he spoke again. "I'm Lucas Hale," he said, as if the name alone explained everything. Mara repeated it silently. "Lucas Hale? The rancher?" She had heard the name before in passing, stories in newspapers and local gossip about a man who had quietly become one of the richest landowners in the region. He owned multiple ranches, cattle, and properties across several counties. He was known for being private, almost secretive, and sometimes ruthless in business. Mara had never imagined that such a person would appear wounded on her small property. Lucas nodded slightly. "Yes, that's me. I keep to myself mostly. People don't see the real me." Mara noticed that even in pain he carried himself with a certain pride and strength. There was no arrogance, but there was a quiet confidence that came from years of experience and wealth. Yet something deeper lay beneath his calm exterior, a layer of tension and caution that Mara couldn't ignore. She tried to piece it together. "So, someone attacked you because of your land?" Lucas looked away, his jaw tight. "Yes. But it's complicated. I've been buying land quietly for years. Some people don't like it, or understand why I do it. And some people take matters into their own hands." Mara didn't fully understand what he meant, but she knew she was stepping into a world far larger than her cabin, her plains, and her quiet life. There were unseen battles happening behind the surface, battles of power, money, and pride. And somehow she had become part of it. Lucas tried to sit upright, but the movement made him wince sharply. Mara rushed to support him. You shouldn't move too much," she said. "You're still bleeding internally. We need to be careful." He gave a faint smile, grateful but frustrated. He was not used to needing help, Mara realized. Helping someone like him was unusual for her. Most people she met were independent, self-sufficient, but Lucas was different, strong yet vulnerable, proud yet human. As the morning turned to afternoon, Mara began noticing more details about him. His clothes were well made but dusty from travel. His hands, though rough from labor, showed signs of someone used to managing both people and projects. There was a calm authority in the way he moved, even slowly, and a sharp intelligence in his eyes. Mara realized that this was a man who could survive in the wild, negotiate with anyone, and carry the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But even he had limits, and last night's arrow had revealed them. Over lunch, Lucas began to speak more freely. He told small stories of life on his ranches, the early mornings, the long hours checking cattle, the solitude of the plains. Mara listened intently. His words painted a picture of a life both harsh and beautiful, lonely yet fulfilling. She could see that he loved his land, that he felt responsible not just for it, but for the people who worked on it. Yet she also sensed the conflicts he faced, disputes over ownership, threats from rivals, and people who resented him quietly but intensely. At one point, Lucas paused, staring out the window. "I wasn't expecting to be attacked like this," he admitted quietly. "I've always been careful. I watch where I go, who I meet. But last night someone managed to get close. They didn't just want to scare me. They wanted to hurt me. Or maybe send a message." Mara felt a shiver. She had grown up in a place where danger was mostly limited to wild animals or the occasional storm. She had never faced deliberate human threat like this, and yet here it was, real and terrifying, affecting someone she had just met. Despite the danger, Mara felt an odd connection forming. Lucas wasn't just a stranger. He was human, vulnerable, and in need of trust. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she mattered in someone's world beyond her own. She offered to help him plan his next steps, to keep him hidden and safe until he recovered. He hesitated at first, clearly not used to relying on anyone, but eventually he agreed. Throughout the day, they talked more. But Mara learned that Lucas had spent decades quietly acquiring land. Not for fame or recognition, but because he believed in preserving open spaces and responsible ranching. Yet his success had created enemies, people who felt cheated, overlooked, or displaced. The arrow in his back was not just a random act of violence. It was part of a larger story of conflict, history, and resentment. Mara began to understand that her simple, peaceful life had intersected with something much bigger than herself. Something complicated, dangerous, and fascinating. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, Mara realized she had spent an entire day learning about a man she barely knew. And yet, she felt a responsibility toward him. A sense that she had been chosen, or at least placed, in the right spot at the right time. Lucas Hale was not just a wounded stranger. He was a man with power, secrets, and burdens, and she was now part of his story. Before sleep took over, Mara prepared the cabin for the night. She adjusted blankets, checked the supplies, and made a quiet promise to herself. Whatever had brought Lucas Hale to her land, she would face it head-on. She didn't yet understand the full danger, the enemies, or the stakes, but she knew one thing. She would not abandon him. Not now. Not when she had seen him vulnerable and in need. Outside, the plains were calm, bathed in the silver light of the rising moon. Mara sat by the window, watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. Round. Somewhere out there, the person who had shot Lucas might be watching, waiting, or planning the next move. But Mara felt ready, determined to protect the man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. She had no idea how complicated this journey would become, but she was certain it would change both their lives forever. And as Lucas slept, recovering slowly, Mara felt the weight of a new beginning settle over her. It was a story of danger, trust, and unexpected connection, and it was only just starting. The next morning, Mara awoke to the sounds of birds stirring and the first light of dawn spilling through the cabin windows. The night had been quiet, but her mind was anything but. Lucas Hale, the man who had arrived at her doorstep wounded, was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in blankets, breathing steadily. Mara watched him for a moment, noticing the small rise and fall of his chest, the way his hand twitched occasionally in his sleep, and the faint shadow of the arrow scar along his back. She felt a mixture of curiosity, concern, and something she could not quite name, a sense that his arrival was only the beginning of something much larger. After making a small breakfast, Mara carried it over to Lucas. He stirred as the smell of eggs and toast reached him, blinking sleepily at her. "Morning," she said softly.
"You need to eat. You're still weak."
Lucas gave a faint smile, a ghost of his usual confidence, and slowly sat up. Mara helped him, careful not to jostle the arrow wound, and placed the plate in front of him. He ate quietly, still processing the events of the past day. As Lucas ate, Mara explained that she had noticed someone moving in the distance the previous day, that she had no idea who might be after him, and that she intended to keep him safe on her property until he could recover. Lucas listened quietly, his green eyes scanning the cabin, noting the simple life Mara had built. "You've made this place safe," he said finally, his voice weak but steady. "That's more than I could have asked for." Mara nodded, feeling a faint warmth at his gratitude. But before she could ask more questions, a sound outside caught both their attention. It was soft at first, almost like wind through the grass, but then it became louder, deliberate, footsteps approaching the cabin. Mara's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Lucas, who tensed immediately, his eyes narrowing. "Stay here," Mara whispered. "I'll see who it is." She crept to the door, lantern in hand, and opened it just enough to peek outside. What she saw made her freeze. A group of people, painted faces shining in the early light, were moving slowly toward her cabin. Their expressions were serious, their eyes fixed on the door. They were not hostile yet, but the look of determination in their stance told Mara this was more than a casual visit. She stepped back quickly and whispered to Lucas,
"We have visitors."
"And I don't think they're here to chat about the weather," Lucas grimaced, pushing himself up slightly despite the pain. "I need to speak to them," he said quietly. "Burr, you can't move much. Let me handle this first." He hesitated, but then sank back against the couch, watching her. Mara opened the door fully, holding the lantern high. The group of people stopped a few feet away, their painted faces and traditional markings clear in the morning light. Mara could see that they were not dressed casually. Their clothing, their stance, and the war paint all spoke of a long history, a pride in their heritage. Their leader, a woman with strong features and bright, watchful eyes, stepped forward.
"Are you the one who owns the land nearby?" the woman asked, her voice calm but firm.
Mara felt her throat tighten. She didn't own much, just this small property.
"I do," she said slowly. "But this is my home."
"I mean no harm to anyone." The woman's gaze shifted past Mara, toward Lucas, who had moved slightly so she could see him from behind Mara's shoulder. "And you," the leader said, looking directly at him. "You're the one who has been buying land in our territory. You've taken what does not belong to you, and you've hurt people in the process." Mara felt a chill. She had suspected that the attack on Lucas had meaning beyond a simple act of violence, but now it was clear. These people had deep reasons, rooted in history and pride, for their anger. She glanced at Lucas, whose eyes were steady but wary. He knew the moment had come to face this truth. "I did not mean to hurt anyone," Lucas said slowly, his voice calm but carrying weight. "I've always tried to work quietly, fairly, and responsibly. I buy land not to take from people, but to protect it, to manage it responsibly. His words hung in the morning air, sincere but cautious. Mara noticed the group did not move or speak. They were listening, measuring him, testing whether his words held truth. The leader shifted slightly, tilting her head. Words mean little if the land is gone, if our people have no control over their own homes. Actions speak louder than promises. Mara could see the pain and history in the eyes of the group. They were not random strangers. They were people with a claim, a past, and a sense of justice that had been ignored for too long. Lucas's jaw tightened, and he nodded. I understand. I want to make this right, but I cannot do it alone. I need your guidance, your help. I don't want conflict. I want understanding! Mara felt a flicker of hope. This was the first time Lucas had truly admitted responsibility, had reached beyond his pride to seek a solution rather than defend himself. The leader of the group studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Perhaps, she said carefully, but trust is earned, and it will not be easy. Mara watched as Lucas listened, silently accepting her terms. There was no arrogance now, only awareness, humility, and the weight of past mistakes. As the conversation continued, Mara realized her role had shifted. She was no longer just a caretaker helping a wounded stranger. Mediator, a bridge between two worlds, the quiet plain she knew and the complicated history that Lucas had entered. She could feel the tension in the air, thick as the morning mist, and she knew that whatever happened next would define not just Lucas's future, but the peace of the land around her cabin. Hours passed with careful dialogue. Mara listened as stories emerged, stories of families displaced, of promises broken, of lands bought quietly but at the cost of community. Lucas listened too, without interrupting, absorbing every detail. He acknowledged mistakes, offered explanations without excuses, and showed a willingness to find solutions. Slowly the group's demeanor softened, though the paint on their faces still spoke of vigilance, of readiness to defend their rights. By midday, Mara realized something remarkable. The arrow that had struck Lucas's back the night before was no longer just a symbol of danger. It was a reminder of accountability, of history catching up with the present. The people in front of her were not enemies. They were stakeholders, guardians of a legacy Lucas had inadvertently touched. And now, for the first time, he was listening with his full attention. The morning had turned to afternoon, and the sun cast golden light over the cabin. The group finally stepped back, signaling a temporary pause in their judgment. "We will watch," the leader said quietly. "But know this, actions will speak louder than words. Show us that your intentions are real, or this peace will not last." Lucas nodded, his expression firm yet respectful. Mara felt a weight lift slightly. The first step had been taken. As the group departed, leaving the painted faces and quiet strength behind, Mara closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Lucas was still sitting, recovering, his eyes thoughtful. "That was intense," she said softly. He nodded. "And it is only the beginning. But at least now I know who I am dealing with. And I know that I must act with care and respect, or I will fail." Mara realized that the world she had known, the quiet, predictable life on the plains, had changed forever. She had been drawn into a story of history, power, and responsibility, one that demanded courage, empathy, and understanding, and she felt a strange thrill at the challenge ahead. That night, as the cabin settled into silence, Mara and Lucas spoke quietly about the future. He would need her help to navigate this new path, to build trust, and to repair relationships. And she, in turn, would learn about the land, its people, and the unseen threads that connected history to the present. Outside, the plains were quiet once again, but Mara knew the calm was temporary. The story was unfolding slowly but surely, and she was determined to be part of it every step of the way. As they prepared for sleep, Mara thought about the morning, the painted faces, the words exchanged, and the fragile trust that had begun to form. She knew challenges lay ahead, that dangers might return, and that Lucas's recovery was only the start of a journey that would test both their courage and their hearts. But for the first time, she felt hope. A hope that even in conflict, understanding could grow, and that the plains, her home, could witness a new beginning. And so, as the moon rose over the high plains, Mara sat quietly beside Lucas, watching the stars blink above, knowing that tomorrow would bring more challenges, but also more opportunity for change, connection, and unexpected courage. The sun was high over the plains the next morning, casting long shadows across Mara's small cabin and the surrounding fields. The quiet that had settled over the land after the encounter with the painted group was temporary, and Mara knew it. She could feel the tension in the air, subtle but undeniable. Lucas Hale had spent the night thinking, and Mara had, too. The events of the previous day had revealed more than she expected. They had not just been about a wounded man or a sudden attack. They were about history, justice, and the weight of choices made long ago. Lucas had been quiet that morning, staring out the window at the horizon. Mara watched him, curious about the thoughts behind those green eyes. Finally, he spoke. "I need to understand everything," he said softly. "Not just the attack, but the history, the families, the land. If I want to make this right, I have to see it through their eyes." Mara nodded. She had never seen him so open, so willing to face a reality larger than himself. It was a side of him that contrasted sharply with the confident private billionaire image the world knew. "Then we need to meet them," Mara said, her voice steady. "We can't just wait for them to come to us again. If you want understanding, you need to show your willingness to face the truth." Lucas nodded, slowly pushing himself up despite the lingering pain from his wound. Mara helped him, steadying him as he stood. Each step he took was careful but deliberate, a reminder that strength alone could not solve the challenges ahead. They made their way to the edge of the plains, where the painted group had gathered the previous morning. Mara kept to the shadows, careful not to appear threatening, while Lucas approached slowly, hands visible to show he meant no harm. The group had returned, their painted faces even more striking in the midday sun. There was no anger in their stance this time, only patience and watchfulness. The leader, the woman with the strong features and bright watchful eyes, stepped forward. "You came willingly," she said, her tone measured. "That is unexpected." Lucas bowed his head slightly, acknowledging her words. "I had no choice," he said, his voice calm. "I need to understand what has been lost, what has been taken, and how I can make it right. I am not here to fight." The leader studied him for a long moment, her eyes scanning his face, noting his sincerity. Mara could see her inner struggle. Trust was difficult after generations of being overlooked and ignored. Finally, she nodded slightly. "Then listen," she said. "Listen to the stories, and do not interrupt. The land has memories, and the people have voices. You must hear them all." The group began to speak, each person sharing their story in turn. Mara listened carefully, absorbing every detail. Families had been displaced, homes lost, traditions overlooked. They spoke of generations who had lived on this land, who had depended on it, and who had seen it change hands quietly, often without their consent. Mara felt a deep sense of responsibility as she listened. She had never realized the depth of history tied to these plains, the weight of decisions made long before she or Lucas had been born. Lucas listened in silence, absorbing each story with quiet humility. He asked questions only when necessary, carefully choosing his words to show respect. Mara noticed a change in him as the hours passed. The confident private man she had first seen was now someone who understood the consequences of his actions. He was beginning to see that land was not just property, but a home, a legacy, and a source of identity. At one point, the leader asked him directly, "Do you understand now why your presence has caused pain?" Lucas's voice was firm but gentle. "I understand that my actions, even if well-intended, have consequences. I did not consider the lives already intertwined with this land. I am willing to make amends, but I need guidance." Mara could see the sincerity in his eyes, the recognition that money and influence alone could not heal old wounds. The conversation shifted as they moved to a flat, open part of the plains. The group began drawing lines in the dirt, marking boundaries and spaces that had been important to them for generations. Mara watched as Lucas knelt carefully, tracing the lines with his finger, feeling the weight of each boundary, each claim. It was a silent lesson in history and respect, a way for the group to teach him about their connection to the land. Mara could see the emotion in Lucas's eyes as he absorbed the meaning behind each mark, each line in the dirt representing generations of care and struggle. Hours passed, and the tension gradually softened. The stories continued, and Mara noticed something remarkable. The group was no longer only watching Lucas with caution. They were beginning to see his willingness to listen, his respect for their history, and his desire to change. Mara felt a surge of hope. Trust was being built, slowly and carefully, like a fragile bridge over turbulent waters. Lucas spoke again, sharing his own perspective. He explained that he had always sought to preserve open spaces, to maintain the beauty of the plains, and to manage the land responsibly. He admitted mistakes, acknowledged oversights, and promised to work towards solutions that honored the past while preparing for the future. Mara could see the group absorbing his words, weighing their truth, and considering the possibility of reconciliation. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the plains, Mara realized that the confrontation had become something entirely different. It was no longer about anger or conflict. It was about understanding, dialogue, and the possibility of healing. The lines in the dirt were no longer boundaries of conflict. They had become symbols of connection, of recognition, and of respect. The leader finally spoke, her voice steady but full of authority. "This is only the beginning," she said. "Brace. Trust must be earned, and actions must follow words. But today, we have seen a willingness to listen, and that is the first step toward healing." Lucas nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Mara felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a quiet awareness that the journey was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, still history to confront, and still decisions to make. They returned to Mara's cabin as night fell, the plains bathed in silver moonlight. Lucas moved carefully, his strength returning slowly, but his mind was clearly focused on the lessons of the day. Mara followed behind, carrying supplies and offering support where needed. The quiet of the cabin felt different now, charged with possibility and responsibility. Inside, they spoke late into the night, reflecting on the stories, the lessons, and the lines in the dirt. Mara could see the determination in Lucas's eyes, the commitment to act responsibly, and the growing understanding that real power was not measured in wealth, but in respect, humility, and the ability to listen. She felt a sense of pride in the role she had played, guiding him through the first steps of this journey. As the stars twinkled outside the windows, Mara realized that the plains would never be the same. The land, the people, and Lucas himself were all part of a story that was unfolding with each passing day. And though the challenges were far from over, a new sense of hope had emerged. Hope that through dialogue, understanding, and respect, past wounds could begin to heal. Before sleep finally took them, Mara and Lucas made a silent agreement. They would face the coming challenges together. Lucas would act with care and humility, guided by the history and voices of the people. Mara would continue to support him, bridging the gap between his world and theirs. And together they would work to honor the land, the legacy, and the future of the plains. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the soft scent of earth and morning dew. Mara knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, and new opportunities for change. But for now, the cabin was quiet. The lines in the dirt had been drawn, and a fragile but meaningful trust had begun to grow. And as Lucas finally drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, Mara sat quietly by the window, watching the moonlight dance across the plains, feeling the weight and promise of the day settle over her. The journey was far from over, but a foundation had been laid, a foundation built on listening, understanding, and the courage to face history head-on. The next morning, Mara woke to the gentle light of dawn filtering through her cabin windows. The plains outside were calm, the grass swaying softly in the breeze, and the bird song was gentle but constant. For the first time since Lucas Hale had arrived on her doorstep, the air felt lighter. Attention from the previous encounters with the painted group had not disappeared entirely, but something had shifted. Trust, fragile as it was, had begun to grow. Mara could sense it in Lucas's calm movements and the quiet determination in his eyes. Lucas was already awake, sitting near the window, looking out at the endless expanse of plains that stretched beyond her cabin. He had spent the night thinking, reflecting, and planning. Mara approached quietly, careful not to disturb him. "Morning," she said softly. Lucas turned, giving her a faint, tired smile. "Morning," he replied. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about yesterday, about the stories, the land, and the people." Mara nodded. She had spent hours listening to him and the group, helping him understand the history and the emotions tied to the land. "And what did you decide?" she asked gently. Lucas's eyes were thoughtful, but steady. "I decided to act," he said simply. "Not just words, not just promises. I want to do something real, something that will show I respect the people, their history, and this land." Mara felt a flicker of hope. After all the uncertainty, the fear, and the pain, Lucas was finally ready to turn understanding into action. "Then let's begin," she said, her voice firm but warm. Together they prepared for the first steps of reconciliation. Lucas wanted to meet the community formally, to listen to them, and to work on solutions that would honor both the land and the people who had lived on it for generations. Mara helped him organize the meeting, inviting the group back to her cabin under the promise of dialogue and respect. By mid-morning, the painted group arrived, cautious but attentive. Their leader, the woman who had guided the first confrontation, stepped forward. "We are here," she said. "We will listen and observe. Actions will speak louder than words." Lucas nodded, his face calm and respectful. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he said. "I am here to learn, to listen, and to act. I understand now that the land is not just property. It is a part of your history and your lives. I want to honor that, and I want to make amends in every way I can." The group began to speak, sharing more details about their concerns, and the importance of each plot of land, each grazing area, and each landmark that had meaning to them. Mara watched as Lucas listened carefully, asking questions only to clarify, never to interrupt. Desk. He took notes, sketched maps, and discussed potential solutions that could benefit both parties. Hours passed, and slowly, the atmosphere changed. The initial tension softened as Lucas's sincerity became clear. He did not try to justify his past actions or make excuses. Instead, he focused on listening, understanding, and planning practical steps to restore trust. Mara could see the relief and hope growing in the group's expressions. They were beginning to believe that someone with power and wealth could act responsibly and honorably. Lucas proposed several initiatives. He would allocate portions of his ranches for community use, ensuring families could continue traditional practices without interference. He promised to involve local leaders in every major decision regarding the land, creating a council to maintain dialogue and transparency. He even suggested educational programs and preservation projects to honor the heritage and history of the land. Mara was impressed by his commitment, by the depth of thought he was putting into solutions that were fair and respectful. The leader of the group finally spoke, her voice calm but strong. "We will watch closely," she said. "But today, we see someone who is truly willing to learn and act responsibly. That is a beginning. We will not forget the past, but we will support efforts that honor it." Lucas bowed his head slightly, acknowledging her words. Mara felt a deep sense of relief. The first step toward healing had been achieved, and it had been built on understanding, dialogue, and sincere action. As the day progressed, Mara noticed subtle changes in the group. Smiles appeared, conversations became more open, and laughter, soft but genuine, began to punctuate the discussions. The plains, which had seemed tense and heavy, felt lighter, filled with hope and possibility. Mara looked at Lucas and saw the transformation in him as well. He was no longer the wounded, cautious man she had found on her doorstep. He was confident, not in power but in responsibility, aware of his actions and committed to making a difference. By evening, the group had departed, leaving Mara and Lucas alone in the cabin. A weight of the day's events settled over them, but it was a weight of accomplishment, not fear. Lucas turned to Mara, his expression soft. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I could not have done this without you. You guided me, helped me listen, and helped me understand what really matters." Mara shook her head, smiling. "You did the hard part. You chose to listen, to act, and to change. I just helped you see it." "Wake!" They shared a quiet meal, the sun setting behind the hills, casting warm orange and pink hues across the plains. Mara felt a sense of peace, knowing that despite the challenges, progress had been made. The arrow wound on Lucas's back was more than a scar. It was a reminder of what had happened, a mark of accountability and a symbol of the start of a new chapter. Over the following days, Lucas worked tirelessly to implement the plans they had discussed. He met with local families, attended community gatherings, and made decisions with careful consideration. Mara assisted, bridging communication and helping him navigate the complexities of human relationships. Slowly but surely, trust was rebuilt, and new bonds formed. Mara saw people smile as Lucas listened to them, saw them nod in agreement as he honored their requests, and felt the energy of cooperation spreading across the plains. One evening, as they stood together looking out over the fields, Mara noticed something remarkable. The land no longer felt divided by past conflicts. The boundaries marked in the dirt, which had once symbolized tension, now represented connection, respect, and shared purpose. Lucas placed his hand on Mara's shoulder, a gesture of gratitude and understanding. "This land, these people, it's more than I imagined," he said softly. I see now what it means to truly care for something, not just own it." Mara smiled, understanding that this moment, quiet and simple, was the culmination of everything they had faced. Weeks passed, and life on the plains began to settle into a new rhythm. Lucas continued his work, balancing his ranch responsibilities with the needs and wishes of the local community. Mara remained by his side, guiding and supporting him, while also learning more about the history and significance of the land. The plains were alive with a renewed sense of harmony, a testament to the power of understanding, respect, and action. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mara reflected on the journey they had taken. The man who had appeared at her doorstep wounded and mysterious was no longer just a stranger. He had grown, learned, and acted with courage. The people who had once approached with painted faces and caution had seen his sincerity and responded in kind. And Mara, who had thought her life was quiet and simple, had become part of something extraordinary. Lucas, standing beside her, looked out over the plains, the wind gently tugging at his hair. "Thank you, Mara," he said. "Not just for helping me survive, but for helping me see what truly matters. I will not forget this." Mara shook her head, smiling. "Neither will I. We've both learned a lot, and the land has taught us even more." The night settled over the plains, quiet and calm. The arrow scar on Lucas's back remained, a small but significant reminder of the past, but it no longer represented danger or fear. It symbolized growth, accountability, and the courage to face challenges with honesty and respect. Mara knew that life would continue to bring obstacles, but with trust, understanding, and determination, they could face whatever came next. And as they stood together under the moonlight, the plains stretching endlessly before them, Mara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey that had begun with a wounded man and a mysterious attack had led to healing, connection, and the beginning of a new chapter for everyone involved. The story of Lucas Hale, Mara Calder, and the plains was not just about survival. It was about understanding, courage, and the power of choosing to do what is right, even when it is difficult. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the soft scent of earth and renewal. Mara and Lucas knew that their lives had changed forever, and that the land, which had witnessed both conflict and healing, would continue to shape them in ways they could never have imagined. And in that quiet, serene moment, they felt the promise of the future, one built on respect, compassion, and the courage to act with integrity, no matter the challenges ahead.